Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the soft shadows of a royal tent lit only by the orange flicker of olive oil lamps. Silk rustles. A chill stirs across your bare shoulders. You're sitting cross-legged on a low-couch wooden tray before you, and outside somewhere beyond the flapping canvas your kingdom waits to be born. You're not a warrior yet. You're not even a teenager. But you're Alexander, son of Philip, and whether or not you know it, breakfast this morning will be one of the last normal ones of your entire life. Your fingers are sticky with honey. A flatbread sits warm in your lap made from barley ground by slaves who rose earlier than you ever will. It smells earthy and faintly smoky. You nibble the edge listening to the hoofbeats of the royal stables, where horses are being saddled for no reason other than they must always be ready. You're 9, and today's your lesson day. Your body still aches from wrestling practice. Your arms are bruised from the wooden sword. You reach for the little dish of soft cheese goat, mostly and sharper than you prefer. But you eat it anyway because your mother says kings don't win wars with empty stomachs. Beside the cheese is a cluster of black olives wrinkled like old men's toes. They're brined in sea salt and oil, and you pick them apart with practiced fingers. There's fruit too, a fig so ripe it's splitting at the seams. It tastes like syrup and dust and sun. You don't know yet that this is considered a luxurious breakfast for Macedonians. Most children outside the palace would get only porridge, maybe a few crushed dates if they were lucky. But you prince in training eat like a young commander even if you're still too small to hold a real spear. In a few minutes a servant will arrive with a bronze pitcher of watered-down wine. You'll grimace at the first sip. It's sour metallic fermented in clay. Your mother insists. Water is untrustworthy. Only wine thinned and watched carefully is fit for royalty. Wine is civilizing, she once whispered, even when it burns. And while you sip and chew, your tutor arrives. Today's topic, the Iliad. Your favourite. You'll pretend not to be excited, but you already know the verses by heart. You think of Achilles every time you strike someone too hard in practice. You imagine yourself heroic, untouchable. But even Achilles needed to eat. Here's something funny. Historians still argue whether Macedonian breakfast customs were Greek or more rustic. Some say your father clung to old Dorian habits, feasting only at night, leaving mornings to soldiers and servants. Others think your palace nestled near the edges of the Hellenic world blended foreign habits early on. One thing's for sure, nobody wrote down your breakfast menu, which feels like a missed opportunity. But they did say you like to eat quickly. That even as a child your meals were more like pit stops between obsessions. You never lingered, never chatted over crumbs. You tore bread with one hand and reached for a scroll with the other. A soldier's appetite, your father used to call it. Still, you did have favourites. Everyone remembers the way you scowled at undercooked lentils, or the time you refused a pheasant wing because it wasn't roasted enough, prompting your cook to burst into tears. Food for you was never indulgence. It was efficiency, fuel, and yet there were soft moments. You once shared an entire tray of dates with your best friend Hephaestion, under a cypress tree speaking only in whispers. You tried to stole an apple in a grove and swore it was the best thing you'd ever eaten. You nibbled honeycomb straight from the wax once and looked stunned. But back to now. Your tutor clears his throat and the olives are gone. The cheese dish is empty. You're licking your fingers and you glance sideways to see if anyone noticed. They didn't, or they pretended not to. That's another perk of being royal. Your bad habits are just considered charming. Outside the breeze picks up. It smells of leather, of dust, of sun on bronze. You finish your fig. And with the last swallow you leave behind not just breakfast but childhood itself. Because tomorrow your father begins military drills at dawn. And from that day forward, breakfast will never be just breakfast again. The morning sun climbs a little higher now, painting the palace walls in gold. You're still chewing on the last memory of fig when someone slides aside the tent flap, bowing just enough to remind you of your rank. It's time to move. Time to get dressed. Time to act princely. But let's not pretend things get more extravagant as you grow. In fact, your meals remain oddly simple. Even as your power grows, even when you're crowned King of Macedon at age 20, your tastes don't change much. Macedonians, after all, are famously unpretentious. They eat to live, not the other way around, even royalty like you. While Greek nobles hold symposiums with reclining couches and harp music, your people prefer a fire pit, a spit of meat and bread thick enough to bruise someone with. There's pride in the simplicity, grit in the grain. You bite into a hunk of crusty bread with no olive oil in sight. Just salt barely enough to matter. It's yesterday's bread reheated over a brazier. The cheese is goat again, or maybe sheep, it's hard to tell when the flavours bleed together. There's a jug of wine nearby, diluted again, because drinking strong wine straight is considered barbaric, which is ironic, because your father's closest friends are technically considered barbarians by the Greeks, and you, child of Olympias raised on stories of snakes and omens, aren't exactly the picture of a conservative Athenian boy. Still, you sit politely at the low table, you chew slowly, you speak sparingly. There are guards at your back always, and at least one cousin glaring at you across the bowl of lentils, wondering if he'll be the next one to accidentally fall off a horse. Lunch is barely different. Some more beans boiled and mashed, a few bitter greens, maybe a scrap of dried fish preserved in olive brine so salty it hurts your teeth. Macedonians don't fuss about seasoning. They prize endurance, not elegance, and so you chew each bite like it's a test of character. You're allowed fruit in the afternoons, especially apples. You've always loved apples. And dates when you can get them. Figs, of course, but citrus hasn't reached you yet. That will come later with the Persians, with the war. At this point, dinner is your big meal, but even then don't expect gold-plated pheasants or flaming pastries. More likely you'll be eating lentils again. Maybe a leg of lamb if the cooks are feeling generous. Maybe boiled chickpeas served with vinegar which you pretend to like. One record says you once spat out a serving of quail stew because it was too sweet. Your mother had it seasoned with cinnamon and honey Phoenician style, and you hated it. Too foreign, too soft. You demanded something tougher, something with bite. That might have been the night you learned to stab your food with a dagger when no utensils were handy. Here's the odd part, though. This wasn't just preference. It was politics. Macedonian kings were expected to eat like their men. No flashy feasts, no indulgent meals in public. Appearances mattered. If your soldiers were chewing stale barley cakes, then so were you. Or at least that's what they thought. Because privately, behind closed tent flaps, you sometimes indulged. Not lavishly, but with curiosity. You asked for foreign nuts. You sampled strange sauces from traders who passed through. And once, just once, you demanded a dish made entirely of onions because a Greek soldier joked it would make you stronger than Hercules. It didn't. You burped onions for a day and a half. Still, the lesson stuck. Food could be power, not just fuel. Historians still debate whether your father Philip shaped your palate through strictness or indifference. Some believe he deliberately starved you of luxury, hoping to make you resilient. Others argue he simply didn't care, too busy plotting conquests and fathering rivals. Either way, your table became a quiet battlefield of its own, and in that silence you learned. You learned that eating too slowly showed weakness, that asking for seconds implied greed, that refusing food was seen as insult unless done strategically. At one banquet, you famously declined an offered platter of stuffed goose. Why? Because the host had once mocked your sword grip during training. Everyone noticed. The platter sat untouched for the rest of the evening like a corpse at a wake. But even amidst these rituals, there were lighter moments. Once Hephaestion dared you to eat an entire bowl of goat tripe. You did it, without flinching, and then dared him to swallow 3 pickled garlic bulbs in a row. He tried. He failed. He didn't speak for the rest of the day, though the smell lingered. And as the stars rise over Pella tonight, your dinner tray is cleared. You stretch out on the low-couch stomach, full but unsatisfied. Because deep down, food still bores you. It's not conquest. It's not legacy. It's just something that has to happen between ideas. Still you eat, because kings must, even ones who dream of being gods. It's another sunlit morning in the garden, though not the kind of garden where birds chirp gently and flowers lean toward the warmth. This is Aristotle's garden, which means everything here is organised philosophical and a little too serious for your liking. You're seated cross-legged on a woven mat. The dew has just started to dry and the grass underneath you smells like wet parchment. There's a platter at your side with a handful of dried figs, a small loaf of barley bread, and a wedge of cheese that's already sweating in the heat. You pop a fig into your mouth as Aristotle launches into an explanation about ethics and the golden mean. You chew as slowly as possible, hoping the sugar rush will make his monologue more bearable. It doesn't. The figs are chewy rich and sticky enough to gum your teeth together, perfect for pretending you can't answer a question because your mouth's full. Aristotle isn't fooled. He pauses only to point out that the discipline of eating is itself a moral choice. You roll your eyes, silently of course. You've heard the story that Plato used to eat only olives and plain barley bread. You wonder if that made him wise or just miserable. Still, Aristotle is patient and kind in his own way. He lets you bring your dog to lessons and once gave you a lemon-scented herb to chew when you had a sore throat. But he does get annoyed when you try to bribe the cook. Because yes, you've tried, several times, You once asked the kitchen boy to sneak in some honey cakes before a long philosophy session. He refused, said Aristotle had warned him already. Let the mind grow hungry, he said, and the soul will follow. That was the day you swore vengeance, and ate 5 honey cakes after dinner just to feel victorious. The meals at Misa, where Aristotle tutors you and other noble sons, are plain by design. The boys are given the same fare regardless of their rank: lentils, beans, goat cheese, pickled vegetables and barley cakes so dense they could double as weapons. There's wine, of course, always wine, but never unwatered. You once made the mistake of drinking from the wrong amphora and blacked out before lunch. Aristotle made you copy Plato's Republic in wax tablet as punishment. Not read, copy. Still, there's the occasional luxury. Sometimes a merchant caravan passes through and suddenly your plate includes dried apricots or even candied citron peel. You love those days. But your favourite might be the strange pine nut paste that one of Aristotle's foreign students introduced, imported from somewhere near Lydia. You dipped bread in it and didn't speak for 10 straight minutes. There's a sort of ritual to meals in the garden. Aristotle insists on silent chewing for the first few bites. Let the stomach and mind align, he says. It's weird but effective. You find your thoughts clearer when your mouth is full and nobody's talking. That doesn't stop Hephaestion, of course. He chews like a war drum and talks through every bite. He once described in graphic detail how goat intestines are cleaned while you were trying to eat them. You nearly threw up. He found it hilarious. You didn't. Historians still argue whether Aristotle's influence shaped your taste in food, or merely your attitude toward it. Some say he encouraged you to be ascetic, disciplined, measured. Others think he merely tolerated your impatience and tried to keep up. There's even a fringe theory that your later love of spice and excess was a rebellion against these early bland years. Either way, the fact remains Aristotle didn't just feed your mind, he helped train your stomach too. And not just with food. You were once made to fast for 2 days before a difficult lesson, just to test your focus. The result: you fell asleep mid-debate and mumbled something about figs conquering Persia. It became a running joke among your peers, yet you never forgot the lesson hunger clarifies, even if it's unpleasant. By the time you're 16, your daily meals are part of your mental training. Eat too much, you'll grow sluggish. Eat too little, and your thoughts get sharp, but your temper sharper. You learn to balance. You learn to mask hunger when needed. You learn to pretend you're full when the army's watching. One time, Aristotle catches you sneaking a second helping of cheese and just nods. Desire is natural, he says, but it should never rule you. That line sticks with you for years. It echoes later as you weigh whether to press deeper into India knowing your army is starving. It comes back as you sit at banquets piled with delicacies and wonder who's watching for signs of weakness. It replays in your head the night you drink the final fateful cup in Babylon. But for now, the meal is done. The figs are gone. The cheese plate has been picked clean. The barley bread remains crusty and untouched. You rise brushing crumbs from your tunic. Aristotle calls you back one more thought about the virtue of moderation. You sigh. He doesn't get it. Not yet. Because one day you'll be the man who conquers the world, and moderation will be the first casualty. You don't remember the exact moment it changed, but at some point meals stopped happening at tables. There's no linen, no plates, no quiet hum of a palace kitchen. Now food is whatever you can carry, and wherever you can eat it. Usually with your fingers, often while riding. You're on campaign. The first true march begins with high spirits and heavy packs. You stride alongside your companions Hephaestion, Ptolemy, even the famously pessimistic Craterus, while horses snort and cartwheels groan. Your men hum tunes and boast about how quickly Persia will fall. Someone's already betting he'll be eating Babylonian honey pastries within the year. But then it starts the rations. At first it's manageable. Flat barley cakes, dried meat, pickled vegetables packed tightly in clay jars. Soldiers chew on strips of smoked goat eyes narrowed against the sun. Bread grows harder by the day, each bite threatening a cracked tooth. Olive oil, once drizzled luxuriously, is now a smear on a fingertip. Your personal stash is better, of course. You're the king. You have mule trains filled with amphorae salt jars, fruit preserved in honey, and wineskins thick as your wrist. But you still pretend to suffer alongside your men. You make a show of chewing the same barley cakes, sipping the same weak wine. They love you for it, even when at night you slip behind a curtain and eat something hot. Your cooks, those poor overworked geniuses, have mastered the impossible. They can roast wild quail over a makeshift fire-boil lentils in bronze pots, even bake a kind of travelling bread using nothing but coals and salt water. You never ask how. You just eat. Still you learn something new on campaign. Appetite is not constant. It bends with distance, with stress, with boredom. You discover that after 10 hours in the saddle, even vinegared onions taste like feasts. That hunger can elevate the blandest root into a delicacy. And that the best spice truly is exhaustion. But even exhaustion doesn't improve certain meals. Take, for example, the infamous time your supply lines broke near the Halys River. For 5 days, your men gnawed on dried legumes and something called soldier's mash, a horrifying blend of chickpeas, onions, stale beer, and goat fat mashed into a paste and wrapped in cabbage leaves. You ate it too, once. Afterward, you quietly declared it forbidden. Even the Persians don't deserve that you joked. Your men laughed, sort of. Then there were the stolen meals, your favourite kind if you're honest. Not stolen from the poor, but from victory. After a siege, after a skirmish, your army would descend on a town and gather whatever could be cooked, chewed or boiled. Chickens, figs, wheat, wine, salt, and in one memorable case an entire cart of dates soaked in palm syrup. You once ate 6 of those dates in a row and forgot where you were for a moment. A good moment. Historians still debate how closely you followed Greek military rations versus adopting local customs. Some believe you preserved Hellenic discipline, forcing even your commanders to eat like hoplites. Others claim you embraced whatever the land gave you, trading, adapting, consuming. There's even a record of you trying fermented camel milk in a desert camp. You did not try it again. One fact is clear food logistics became part of your genius. You reorganized supply trains, demanded ration charts, ordered field bakeries. You even had a rotating system of cooks embedded with units so your soldiers didn't just eat, they ate well enough to keep moving. And you weren't above getting creative. Once when meat was scarce, you ordered ox hides soaked, scraped and boiled until they resembled soup. You told your men it was Spartan stew. Most of them believed you. One passed out. You pretended it was from excitement. You learned to eat quickly, silently, with purpose. Long dinners were for satraps. You had battles to plan, territories to absorb, worlds to conquer, and yet occasionally you paused. Like that one night outside Sardis when you found a patch of wild thyme growing near your campfire. You broke it apart, crumbled it over hot lentils and inhaled deeply. It reminded you of home, of your mother's kitchen, of simpler mornings. Hephaestion noticed, said nothing, just handed you another slice of bread. Because even kings need comfort food. And out here, far from Mysa, far from Pella, far from your old tutor's fig lectures, comfort comes wrapped in lentils or in the steam rising from a stolen pot of broth. Or in the quiet moment when you can pretend just for one bite that you're not Alexander the Great. Just Alexander, hungry, tired, human. You're further from home than you've ever been. Beyond the Tigris, beyond the Zagros Mountains, and now beyond the edge of anything Macedonian food ever dreamed of. This is Persia, and your taste buds are about to be permanently confused in the best possible way. You're seated beneath a silk canopy, the Persian air thick with incense and possibility. Dishes are paraded before you with names you can't pronounce, and aromas that make your soldiers suspicious. You, however, lean in, curious, always curious. Tonight's centerpiece is a golden bowl of pilaf steamed rice with saffron cinnamon, toasted nuts and lamb so tender it melts beneath your fingers. You stare at it like it's a puzzle. Then you dig in. One bite and your eyebrows lift. Why didn't Macedon invent this? Your men used to barley mush and dried goat eye the dishes like they might be cursed. Hephaestion eats with polite reluctance, though he quietly admits the almond-stuffed dates are not bad. Ptolemy complains that the honey-glazed carrots are too sweet. Craterus demands a wineskin and pretends the food doesn't exist. But you're enchanted. Because here food isn't just fuel, it's ceremony. Each dish is seasoned, deliberately served in a specific order. Aromatic stews, roasted pigeons stuffed with mint and raisins, flatbreads with poppy seeds and sesame, jugs of date wine poured from handles shaped like lions. Even the rice is different, long-grained, fragrant, nothing like the grainy mess from your earlier campaigns. You take another bite of pilaf and close your eyes. This is not just a feast, this is conquest made edible. And then there's the saffron, bright, floral, expensive enough to bankrupt a minor noble back home. Here it's stirred casually into soup, sprinkled on flatbreads, infused in syrup. You're told it comes from crocus flowers harvested by hand, each thread a royal's ransom. You briefly wonder how much saffron it would take to buy a general. More dishes arrive, sweet, sour, salty all at once. A stew thickened with pomegranate molasses, fritters stuffed with leeks and lamb liver, tiny cucumbers pickled in brine and coriander. Some items are strange even for you, like the smoked sturgeon in rosewater jelly. You try it anyway. Why not? You've eaten worse. Remember the boiled ox hide? But this is civilization. Historians still argue whether you adopted Persian food because you admired it, or because it made occupation easier. After all, you didn't just eat Persian, you became Persian in many ways. You wore their robes, sat on their thrones, married their women. Was it diplomacy or genuine fascination? Probably both, but no one denies you liked the food. In fact, you eventually began insisting that certain Persian dishes be prepared on campaign. Your cooks learned, adapted, created hybrids Macedon meets Mesopotamia. You once asked them to make lentils the Persian way, and it became a favourite stewed with cinnamon and honey served over rice topped with crushed pistachios. You even developed preferences. You loved roasted quail with tamarind glaze. You hated anything overly floral, especially stews with too much rosewater. You tolerated pickled radishes, but only if sliced thin. And you absolutely despised melon seeds in desserts. Too crunchy. Like eating gravel with sugar. One night you sat beside Darius's former cook. A captured man now in your service. You asked him what the great king used to eat before battle. He smiled, then served you exactly that lamb braised in sour cherry sauce, with a side of mint-roasted carrots and rice-tinted pink with beet juice. You took one bite and declared that maybe Darius should have stayed home. With food like this, why ever go to war? That joke never quite landed with the Macedonians. There was friction, of course. Your older generals hated the shift in culture. We march like Greeks, we should eat like Greeks, one muttered. You ignored him. Because you saw something they didn't. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was transformation. If you could share a meal with your enemy and enjoy it, then what else could be bridged? And secretly you liked being unpredictable. Let them think you were turning soft on dates and saffron. Let them whisper about rose petal stew and candied walnuts. You were still the same man who rode through fire at Gaugamela. Still the one who slept on the ground beside his soldiers. You just liked your onions caramelized now. Is that so wrong? Besides, for every jeweled rice dish, there were still days of mouldy bread and sour figs. Your taste had changed, yes. But you hadn't forgotten where you came from. Because even at this lavish Persian banquet, as a servant refills your goblet with spiced wine, and another lights the braziers against the desert chill, you glance at the platter of plain barley cakes, someone brought out probably out of nostalgia. And you reach for one, just to remember. The wine comes out before the bread. That's how you know this is a real banquet, not just some strategic dinner with local warlords. This is celebration. Tonight the goblets hit the table before the food, and with them come whispers. Because with wine always comes the chance of poison. You swirl the cup lazily, watching the dark liquid catch the lamplight. The scent is rich, earthy, laced with something unfamiliar. You glance at your cupbearer. He nods. He always nods. Has he tasted it first? Probably. Maybe. Does it matter? You drink anyway. Because if you hesitate, everyone sees. Wine in your world is everywhere. Morning, night, feast, funeral. There is no occasion untouched by it. In Macedon, it's mixed with water to cut its strength. In Persia, it's perfumed and spiced, poured neat into wide, shallow bowls. You've drunk it from golden goblets, from clay cups, from a soldier's canteen after a hard march. You've toasted victories, toasted losses, toasted nothing at all just to keep the men from mutinying. But this tonight is different. Tonight the wine flows fast. It's a deep red Shiraz aged in palmwood barrels said to be favoured by Darius himself. It tastes like Mulberry's iron and the ache behind your eyes. It goes straight to your thoughts, makes the lamplight swim. Your generals raise their cups in awkward harmony. Someone starts a song, someone else falls asleep in their lentils. And the food almost forgets to arrive. You're halfway through your second cup when servants lay down trays of roast lamb glazed with plum sauce eggplant stuffed with garlic and mint, and honeyed bread rolls soaked in fig syrup. Everything smells too strong, too sweet, too indulgent. Exactly what you need. You eat with your fingers dripping sauce onto your sleeve. No one cares, or rather no one dares to care. You're Alexander. You've just taken another city, burned another palace. You can eat like a wild man if you want. Still there's a rhythm to these banquets. First wine, then meat, then more wine, then sweets, then music. Then you guessed it, even more wine. The Persians call it Bamiyan style. You just call it Thursday. Historians still debate whether you drank more heavily in Persia than you did in Macedon. Some say the climate made the alcohol hit harder. Others believe you developed a tolerance so high it would have floored a cavalry horse. There's one account of you out drinking 3 Scythians in a row. That same night you ordered a city wall torn down because it looked like it was judging you. Unverified, of course, but plausible. What's more certain is your uneasy relationship with drink. It brought out your temper. Everyone knew that. After 3 cups you were still charming. After 5 you grew poetic and sad. By 7 you might start lecturing the moon. By 10, well, let's not talk about Clytus the Black. Not yet. Even so, you kept drinking, because in your world wine isn't just leisure, it's bonding, strategy, grief, revenge, memory. You once toasted a fallen general with a cup so full you spilled half of it on your tunic, then made everyone else do the same. You would have wanted it messy, you said. The men laughed, some cried. Wine has a way of making all those things feel connected. One night in the heat of the Persian summer you asked for a different kind of wine imported from Thrace. It was sharp, almost vinegary. You winced, called it truth serum. That night you admitted you missed your mother, that you hated how Hephaestion's eyes looked tired, that you weren't sure if you were still chasing glory or just running from the past. No one wrote that down, but someone remembered. Later you tried to cut back, you really did, after Egypt, after India, after that fever. You told your servants to ration the wine, to dilute it again, to serve fewer rounds at banquets. It lasted exactly 3 nights. Then came a storm, a funeral, a sleepless march, and suddenly the goblet was back in your hand like it had never left. Still, you never let it rule you. Not completely. You ate at those banquets, heartily, purposefully, never letting the wine overshadow the food. Lamb olives, apricots, even bitter melon from the east. You'd chew slowly, thoughtfully, as if passing a riddle with every bite. Sometimes you offered bits to the men beside you. Sometimes you ate in silence, eyes fixed on the flame. And sometimes you smiled to yourself, just a little. Because in those moments, with your stomach warm and your limbs heavy, you weren't just Alexander the Conqueror. You were just a man with a full plate and a story to tell. And that truly was enough. It's not what you'd call a feast. Tonight you sit on a stone ledge in a wind-blasted camp on the edge of Bactria, trying to convince yourself that the thing in your hand is edible. It's dark, dry, stringy. Definitely meat. Possibly camel. Probably jerky. This is not the glorious fare of Persian courts. No saffron, no stews, no jewelled rice. Just camel jerky and silence. The air is thin here, high up, cold enough to bite. You can see your breath between each chew. The wind whistles through the camp's makeshift tents, and somewhere behind you a horse sneezes. Your men are huddled around small fires, too tired to talk, too hungry to be picky. You chew anyway. It's tough, almost rubber. But it's salty, and that's enough. After weeks of marching through narrow mountain passes, dodging rebel tribes and scraping rations together from rocks and prayer, even this leathery slice of meat feels like a miracle. Your cook calls it Bactrian style. You're not convinced. You wash it down with sour wine and tear off a chunk of barley flatbread so stale you could probably use it to hammer tent pegs. Still, it fills your gut and gives your jaw something to do. Welcome to dining at the edge of the known world. By now, food is no longer a matter of taste. It's logistics. You've learned to plan rations like a general plans a siege. How many camels carry wheat? How many goats survive the terrain? Can that root be boiled? Will that dried mushroom kill us? These are dinner conversations now. You remember vaguely the banquets of Persepolis. The honeyed birds, the spice-laden stews, the perfume bowls between courses. They feel like a story someone else told you. You haven't seen a linen tablecloth in months. Your plate is a dented bronze bowl you've used for everything from soup to shaving. Historians still argue whether you chose to eat like your soldiers or if the terrain left you no choice. Some say you saw hardship as a bonding tool. Others insist your supply lines were so broken by this point that you had to survive on forage, barter and luck. The truth, as always, is probably both. There was a stretch 3 days when your entire command staff lived on nothing but roasted grasshoppers and ground acorns. You tried to play it off as an Eastern delicacy. No one believed you, but they ate them anyway. And then there were the surprises. Like the time a local tribe brought you something they called kurat dried yogurt balls, rock hard and mouth-puckering. You hated the first bite, loved the second. By the 5th, you were hoarding them in your travel pouch like treasure. You even tried your hand at cooking once. Just once. One of your soldiers swore by a stew made from dried lentils, snowmelt, and the marrow scraped from a goat's spine. You helped stir it with your dagger. The results questionable, but no one had the heart to say it. Except Hephaestion, who muttered, "Next time, maybe don't cook with your sword." Still you made do. Because in Bactria food wasn't just sustenance, it was morale. Your men would walk 20 miles for a bit of dried fruit or light up at the smell of roasting tubers. Even something as simple as garlic boiled in goat's milk could lift the camp's spirits. You learn to treasure texture, crunch from roasted chickpeas, the sticky pull of dried apricots, the sharp sting of pickled onions even if they made your breath foul for days. You once spent half a night sucking marrow from a split bone just for the warmth it gave your chest. And then there was that night. You sat alone, perched on a cliff overlooking a firelit valley. You had a bowl of thin barley gruel and 2 figs wrinkled and black as shadows. You ate slowly, thoughtfully. The stars were so close you could taste them in the cold. That night you didn't feel like a conqueror. You felt like a man just trying to finish his meal before the frost stole it. And that's the truth of these long campaigns. The food was terrible, but the hunger made everything feel sacred. A single egg found in an abandoned village coop became a treasure. A strip of lamb fat cooked on a flat stone tasted better than any banquet back in Pella. You learned that flavour is not in the food, it's in the moment. In the relief of something hot, in the gratitude of chewing, in the rare brief silence when even war takes a breath. And here in Bactria, with camel jerky cracking between your teeth and wind howling around your shoulders, you feel it. You're alive, you're fed, you're moving forward. And tomorrow, with any luck, you might even get soup. Tonight's feast looks like a treasure hoard. You're seated beneath a shimmering tent stitched with gold thread, and everywhere you look there is shimmer golden platters, jewelled goblets, dishes stacked like monuments to excess. It smells like someone accidentally cooked inside a perfume shop. Cinnamon, cloves, rosewater, smoke, a hint of roasted meat if you can find it beneath all the fragrance. This is what happens when royalty tries to impress you. You Alexander, world shaker, city flattener, the guest of honour at what might be the most aggressively luxurious dinner anyone's ever prepared. Peacocks roasted with their feathers still on. Flaming pastries filled with honey and saffron cream. Grapes wrapped in gold foil. A whole fish encased in pastry shaped like a phoenix. And that's just the appetizers. You sit upright, expression blank, trying not to laugh. You'd kill for a fig and a hunk of bread. But no, tonight you dine like a god. This isn't your first banquet of overkill. After Persepolis, every local noble wanted to outdo the last. One even served a stew in a hollowed-out block of ice. It melted halfway through dinner, and you were left with wet ankles and lukewarm goat soup. You still remember it fondly, at least it was edible. Now your servants bring plate after plate of delicacies so adorned, so garnished, that you can't even tell what's food and what's decorative. You poke at something that resembles a flower. It jiggles ominously, possibly jelly, possibly a test. Hephaestion leans over, whispers, 5 Darricks say that swan explodes when you cut into it. You take the bet. One slice later, the swan emits a puff of scented steam. Inside, minced almond cinnamon, and was that an apricot, you win the bet. But you're still not sure if you lost something else in the process, like your appetite. Still you eat. You have to. These banquets are performance, politics with cutlery. Each dish is a message, each course a diplomatic manoeuvre. Your host is watching nervously, hoping you'll praise the stuffed melon, hoping you'll ask for seconds of the saffron crab legs. You nod politely, chew thoughtfully, sip your wine, pomegranate infused this time, so sweet it could strip enamel. Historians still argue whether you enjoyed this kind of excess or merely tolerated it. Some say you craved the theatrics, that you loved being adored, fed, worshipped. Others insist you hated the pomp and longed for a soldier's meal under the stars. The truth, you like the control. You don't love the gold, the glitter, the meals that arrive still smoking like stage props. But you do love knowing these people will bankrupt themselves just to make you smile at a meatball shaped like a lion. And sometimes it's fun, like the night someone served a stew inside a hollowed-out wheel of cheese, or the occasion where every course was purple bread, purple soup, purple figs soaked in wine and ink. You never figured out why it was all purple. No one dared ask. But not every moment is indulgent. Midway through this feast, you ask for something simple. Bread, cheese, olives. The table goes quiet. Your host looks wounded, but you insist. You tear the bread with your fingers, dip it in oil and chew slowly. Deliberately. It's a message: I don't need your peacock stuffed with lobster, stuffed with quail. I am still Macedonian. I still remember the taste of barley porridge and lentils boiled in salt water. And you want your men to remember it too. Because tonight, as they sit at a separate table, less golden, less perfumed, they are watching you. Always watching. If you gorge yourself on golden pears and candied fish, they will whisper. If you eat plain bread and cheese, they will whisper something else. Something useful. That you are still one of them. But later in the privacy of your tent, you admit it to yourself. Some of it is delicious. You like the apricot paste wrapped in fig leaves. You enjoyed the pistachio sherbet frozen in a bowl of snow from the mountains. You even like the purple bread, though you'll never say it out loud. And tonight, as you lie back, stomach full of 10 kinds of meat and a dozen kinds of sugar, you sigh. Not from regret, from fullness, from the absurdity of it all. Tomorrow you'll be marching again. Tomorrow it might be gruel and onions. But tonight the fish came on golden trays, and you still think that Peacock was looking at you funny. The sand here doesn't behave like normal sand. It doesn't shift. It shimmers. Pale gold underfoot, warm even at dusk, and as you tread across the desert toward the oasis at Siwa, it clings to your boots like ash. The oracle waits ahead, tucked into the folds of Egyptian desolation. You're not thinking about prophecy, though. You're thinking about food. You haven't eaten since morning, and even that was barely a meal. Some travel bread, stale, dates a mouthful of salty cheese that tasted vaguely like wool. But now, as you enter the cool shade of the temple compound, your stomach growls, and you're rewarded with a sight more divine than any vision. A feast laid out beneath palms, fruit gleaming like jewels, honey cakes glistening in the fading light, clay bowls of goat stew spiced with herbs you can't name, and pitchers, many pitchers of date wine so dark it looks like ink. You've reached the ends of the known world, and someone remembered to cook. You sit cross-legged on soft mats while priests chant nearby. The oracle herself remains hidden for now, mysterious veiled ancient, but her servants offer food freely. They say nothing, just smile and motion for you to eat. You start with the stew. It's hot, aromatic, and surprisingly like goat meat stewed with coriander, chickpeas, dried lemon, and just enough chili to tickle. Your mouth burns just a little. You don't mind. It wakes you up. Next, you tear a hunk of flatbread baked on hot stones, blistered at the edges, and use it to scoop roasted eggplant mashed with garlic. It's smoky, sour, comforting. You make a mental note to ask how they did it. Then the sweets. Dates stuffed with almonds and dipped in honey, pistachio pastries dusted with sugar, even a strange chewy confection made from fig paste, and if the texture is to be believed flower petals, you don't ask, you just eat. And somewhere in the middle of it all someone offers you what appears to be a roasted locust. You blink. Is this symbolic? Is it a prank? Is it just lunch? You hesitate, then smile, pop it in your mouth and crunch. It's not bad. Crispy. Nutty. Lightly salted. Your men stare horrified. You grin. Tastes like conquest, you say. They laugh, awkwardly. Historians still argue whether you actually visited the oracle at Siwa for divine inspiration or as a political stunt. Some say you wanted to be declared a god. Others claim you were just tired and curious. But no one disputes what followed the food changed after Siwa. You started requesting Egyptian dishes, not just out of respect but preference. You liked their sour stews, their fermented bread, their honey wine with just a hint of mint. You even grew fond of doom palm fruit, a tart chewy thing that looked like it had been grown in a clay pot and tasted like candied bark. You snacked on them through half the march back toward Memphis. And yet there was always that tension between ritual and appetite. The oracle's feast was meant to prepare you for divine revelation. But for you it was more than that. It was a moment of calm, of stillness, a chance to eat something slow, thoughtful, unfamiliar, because as much as you loved lentils and lamb, it was these strange offerings served by strangers in the middle of nowhere that etched themselves into your memory. You recall sipping from a bronze bowl thick with a barley milk mixture that someone claimed was a drink of the gods. It was grainy, warm, sweet, possibly fermented. You drank 2 bowls. You didn't feel divine, but you did feel full, and perhaps that's all you needed. Later, when the oracle finally speaks, her voice is strange, muffled, full of wind and riddles. She calls you son of Zeus, or maybe she doesn't. Maybe you hear what you want to hear. Maybe it's the wine, or the locust. Hard to say, but what you remember clearly is the food, the cracked dates, the lamb so soft it fell apart in your fingers, the way the priest bowed silently as you finished, and one handed you a fig leaf with something scribbled in charcoal. You never read it, just folded it into your tunic. That night under the stars you chew the last of the honey cake, feel the sand beneath your feet cooling, and wonder if gods ever get hungry. If they do, you hope they eat like this. The air in India smells like nothing you've ever breathed before. Not just the spice, though, that's part of it. It's the heavy sweetness of mango trees, the musk of wet earth, the oily smoke of cooking fires that burn night and day. You feel it in your clothes, your hair, the back of your throat. Everything here is pungent, including the food. You sit cross-legged outside a modest hut offered by a local Raja, sweat clinging to your arms, dust in your sandals. A servant places a small clay tray before you. On it a heap of rice, something stewed and red, and a side dish that appears to be aggressively green. You glance at Hephaestion, who's already chewing cautiously. Hot, he says through gritted teeth. You take a bite. Your eyes water instantly. Your nose runs. Your lips sting. Whatever's in that red stew chili pepper vengeance, it was not made with Macedonian palates in mind. You chew anyway. It's surprisingly delicious. Once the heat passes, there's something earthy beneath it. A tang. Layers of sour tamarind, turmeric, mustard seeds popping in oil. You don't know the words for these things yet, but your tongue does. You reach for the green stuff. It turns out to be mashed lentils with garlic and curry leaves. Also hot, also good. You nod. The servant beams. You down an entire cup of sweet milk to put the fire out in your mouth. Welcome to Indian cuisine. This is new territory in every sense. The land, the language, the food. Gone are the rich Persian stews and delicate figs. Here meals are sharper, simpler, more immediate. Flatbreads cooked on hot stones. Rice boiled with cumin. Goat meat simmered in clay pots so old they feel sacred. And the spices. Oh, the spices. Historians still argue how much of India's cuisine was shared with your army versus what remained local. Some accounts say you forbade your soldiers from eating native food out of fear it would sicken them. Others insist you embraced it fully, asking your cooks to experiment mixing Greek barley with Indian spices, pairing dried figs with mango pickle. The truth, you weren't just experimenting, you were adapting. You learned quickly that the body must adjust to the land it conquers, so you sampled everything. Spicy stews, fried pastries, fermented yogurt drinks that made your stomach churn until it didn't. After a week you stopped sweating so much when you ate. After 2 weeks you asked for more chili. Some nights your army grumbled. They missed the old meals, the bread, the olives, the simpler times. But other nights they devoured flatbread stuffed with onions and potatoes. They tore into marinated chicken roasted over open flames. They spooned lentils onto rice with such enthusiasm you swore it was a celebration. You once told your officers, we march with our stomachs. Let them be local. That earned some groans, but the results spoke for themselves. You began hosting small Indian-style dinners, sitting on floor mats, eating with your hands, sharing bowls. You didn't do it for show. You did it because you liked it. There was one dish in particular, korma they called it. Goat stewed in yogurt, slow-cooked with ginger, cardamom, cloves. It reminded you of Persian lamb, but creamier, more soothing. You asked your cook to learn it. He did. You ate it once a week for the rest of the campaign. And yet for every success there were challenges. You once bit into a chili so hot you genuinely feared for your eyesight. Another time you drank a fermented rice beverage and woke up under a mango tree with a half-written letter to your horse. You never finished it. Then there was the snake stew. A local guide insisted it was a delicacy. You watched the meat boil, curled and pale, smelling vaguely of leather. You tried it. You regretted it. Not for the taste which was bland, but because Hephaestion wouldn't stop hissing at you for the next 3 days. Still you kept eating, you kept learning. You discovered ghee-clarified butter with a nutty aroma. You drizzled it on everything. You grew fond of pickled mango even if it made your breath unbearable. And you began asking for curried lentils before battle, claiming they cleared your thoughts. No one questioned it. Because food here wasn't just about survival, it was about respect, adaptation, presence. If you could eat like the locals, you could become something more than foreign. One night, under a sky thick with monsoon clouds, you sat beside a village fire eating spiced rice off a banana leaf. You were quiet, full, grateful. A small boy offered you a sweet jaggery and coconut rolled into a ball. You ate it, smiled. He laughed and ran away. And for that one moment you weren't Alexander the Great. You were just another traveller sitting barefoot in the dust, eating dinner with strangers who made the world feel wide and strangely warm. The pot bubbles reluctantly over a smoky fire. You crouch beside it, squinting into the steam. The water is murky grey and full of questionable lumps. Whatever's in there might have once been food, but now it's more of a memory, a hint, a gesture. This is what happens when the supply lines fail. You've pushed too far, too fast. The jungle is behind you, the desert ahead, and between them not much else. For days the rations have dwindled to near nothing. The grain sacks are empty. The salted meat has moulded. The last decent olive was eaten a week ago, possibly by your horse. So now it's soup, emergency soup, which is generous. Really, it's boiled leather. Your men scrape the last usable bits from old ox harnesses. They shave dried sinew from shield straps. They boil it with roots that may or may not be mildly poisonous toss, in a few shriveled herbs from a forgotten pouch, and stir, and stir, and stir. You take the first sip. It tastes like old boots and regret. But it's warm, and that matters. You remember when meals used to be pleasant? Roasted lamb, stuffed dates, olive oil trickling from fresh bread. Now your fingers are numb and you're licking grease from a wooden spoon like it's the greatest treasure on earth. You glance at Hephaestion. He's chewing something suspiciously chewy. Don't ask, he mutters, jaw moving slowly. There's laughter in the misery, of course. Gallows humour. One of your officers jokes that if the soup gets any thinner, you'll have to pour it into a cup and drink your disappointment. Another claims he found a beetle floating in his bowl and named it Hope. He ate it anyway. Historians still argue whether this phase of the Indian campaign broke your army or forged it. Some say the starvation, the heat, the endless marching were the beginning of the end. Others believe it bonded your men beyond anything glory ever could. When you've shared a pot of boiled sandal straps, nothing else can come between you. And you never stopped eating what they ate. Even when you could have claimed the last figs, the last dried apricots, the secret stash of Persian almond cakes tucked in your supply wagon, you didn't. Or, well, maybe just one almond cake. It was your birthday. But for the most part you starved alongside them, bit your tongue when your stomach grumbled, chewed slowly, drank your soup with care, and occasionally you got creative, like the time you ordered a whole elephant carcass cooked after a skirmish. No one was quite sure how, or for how long. But your cooks managed it, sort of. They dug a trench, lit fires, built makeshift grills from spears, and fed hundreds of soldiers with greasy, smoky elephant meat. It was tough, stringy, a little strange, but morale surged. You called it victory stew. No one corrected you. Another time your scouts brought back mushrooms so large they looked like helmets. You had them roasted on flat stones. Some tasted like garlic, some like dirt. One made a lieutenant hallucinate an entire conversation with a palm tree. You quietly banned that variety. Still, in these lean times, even weeds became delicacies. Boiled wild spinach, crushed nuts mixed with honey when you had honey, dried fruit mashed with grain to make rudimentary travel bars less food and more edible geometry. You even reinvented gruel, a mix of barley goat's milk when available, a hint of spice from an Indian trader, and just enough salt to make it taste like something. Your men hated it. You claimed it was an ancient royal recipe. They still hated it, but they ate it. Because that's what survival looked like now. You sometimes wondered between spoonfuls of bark tea and root mush what your enemies imagined you were eating. Probably banquets. Silk-robed dinners with grapes and peacock tongues. No one thinks the great man is chewing boiled shoe leather under a tree. And maybe that's why you kept going. Because every meal you endured with your men was proof of something bigger than appetite. It was commitment, endurance, unity. Even when the meal was quite literally soup made from desperation. And yet through it all there were quiet joys. You remember a night when someone found a wild mango tree. Half rotted, half sweet, fully perfect. The entire company ate like children, juice on their chins, laughter between bites. For one moment no one was a soldier. No one was afraid. No one was starving. Just men with fruit. That moment stayed with you. More than any golden banquet. More than the peacock swan. More than the jeweled dates and cinnamon duck. Because when everything else had crumbled and the world narrowed down to what could be carried on your back or boiled in a dented pot food still connected you to something essential. To home, to memory, to each other. Even when it tasted like rope. You can hear them chewing. That's the first sign. The camp is quiet, unusually so, except for the sound of tired mouths working through dry bread and boiled beans. There's no laughter, no songs, just the rustle of cloaks and the dull scrape of spoons on metal bowls. You look out over your army, thousands of men hunched low, eating in silence, the night pressing down like a wet blanket. This is not a glorious meal. This is survival. Tonight your men are eating barley paste. Again, ground by hand, mixed with water and pressed into something vaguely edible. It's not quite a porridge, not quite a cake. It's beige, unremarkable, and sticks to your teeth like regret. You take a bite anyway, because you're not exempt, not tonight. Even your officers are quiet. Ptolemy picks listlessly at his lentils. Craterus, ever the loyal grumbler, mutters something about how even Roman prisoners eat better than this. You almost remind him that Rome doesn't even matter yet. Almost. Instead you sip your wine, thin-watered and sour, and chew. This is what the army really eats. Not the banquets, not the feasts with roasted lamb and rivers of honeyed wine. Those are rare, performative, occasional flickers of indulgence in an otherwise bland diet of boiled grains, dried onions, and mystery meat that usually isn't worth identifying. And the worst part, they've gotten used to it. Historians still argue about the composition of your army's diet. Some say it was carefully planned with daily rations of grain, cheese, wine, and salted meat. Others suggest it was entirely haphazard, whatever could be scavenged, foraged, or bought in the nearest village. Both are right, and both are wrong. Because the truth lies in motion, your army moved constantly. Food was always in flux. Some days you'd have figs, cheese, and lamb. Other days you'd have more barley, and a beetle you swore was staring at you. There were standard rations, yes, a soldier's allotment of barley or wheat, a few onions, sometimes dried olives, and a splash of wine. But how that translated into meals depended on fire's weather morale, and whether the cook accidentally poisoned the last pot of stew. You once lost an entire company to spoiled lentils, not to death, thank the gods, but to diarrhea so severe the camp medic gave up and started building extra latrines. You personally declared the offending cook a danger to civilization. He took it as a compliment, but even in hardship there were rituals. Every evening fires flickered to life. Soldiers gathered in clusters, cooking their rations together, sharing spices and gossip. Someone always had a pinch of something cumin salt, a stray garlic clove to make the meal tolerable. You encouraged this, because even the worst food tastes better when shared. You remember the smell of burnt bread on a windy night, the sound of beans bubbling in iron pots, the feel of grain between your fingers as you sifted for pebbles. You once walked the length of the camp without armour just to sit by a group of foot soldiers. You ate their paste, drank their wine, told a story about a goat who outran a chariot. They laughed so hard someone snorted lentils. Moments like that built empires. Not the battles, not the speeches, the meals. And sometimes there were tiny victories. A caravan would arrive, a shipment would catch up. Suddenly the cook had raisins, or cinnamon, or once gloriously an entire wheel of aged cheese. You personally demanded that it be grated onto every soldier's next portion of barley. That was a good day. But for every surprise feast there were 10 more meals like tonight. Bread so hard it needed to be soaked. Meat so dry it crumbled like parchment. Wine that made your throat close. Barley that stuck to the roof of your mouth in a way that made you question all your life choices. Still you ate, you always ate, because a hungry soldier is a dangerous one. You learned to keep stockpiles, to rotate supplies, to inspect grain yourself. Once you lifted a sack of millet, sniffed it, and handed it back with a single word, mouldy. The quartermaster paled. That millet never made it to dinner. You also learned the power of gesture. If you sat down and ate the same slop as your men, they followed you into fire. If you touched your food first, no one feared poison. If you raised a goblet, they drank even if it was swamp wine mixed with vinegar and regret. And they remembered. Years later, veterans would recall the exact meals they shared with you. The night the king ate barley paste like the rest of us. The day he chewed dry lentils and didn't flinch. The time he traded his portion of bread for a soldier's sick mother. Not the food, the moment. Because in those quiet, hungry hours between glory and grief you weren't Alexander the Great. You were just the man who ate beside them, and that they never forgot. The mood was light when the banquet began. It had been weeks since your last proper celebration, and the city freshly conquered, reluctantly tamed, offered you its finest tribute. Roasted meats, delicate fish fruit arranged like mosaics, wine in silver goblets, and sweetmeats so fragrant the servants carried them with gloves. You sat at the centre, golden talk on your arm legs stretched out on cushions, the scent of grilled eel curling in the air. Hephaestion sat beside you already, halfway through his second helping of spiced fowl. You raised your goblet to him, smiling. Neither of you knew it would be the last toast. The banquet continued like so many before it, loud, indulgent, laced with laughter and slurred Macedonian poetry. There were dances, flutes, a jug of honey wine so thick it had to be ladled. The eel was perfectly done, smoked, glazed with plum sauce and sprinkled with sesame. Hephaestion ate seconds, possibly thirds, and then hours later he began to cough. No one noticed at first. The room was too loud. But by the time his head slumped against your shoulder, the warmth of the feast had already turned to ice. The great Hephaestion, your dearest friend, your other self, was carried from the room. And you never finished your meal. Historians still debate what killed him. Some say it was the eel undercooked or left too long in the heat. Others claim it was tainted wine or a fever he'd been hiding. One theory even blames poison, though no one agrees on who would dare, or why, All you know is this one moment he was beside you, fingers greasy with lamb fat eyes shining in the firelight. The next he was gone. You didn't eat for days after that. Food lost its colour, bread turned to dust, wine soured in your mouth. Even your favourite dishes, the lentils with mint, the soft cheese wrapped in fig leaves, tasted like ash. In your grief you tore down the feast hall. The very place where he laughed now reduced to cinders and smoke. You built a pyre instead, ordered the army to shave their heads, refused to speak to anyone for 3 days. Some say you tried to starve yourself, but eventually hunger won, as it always does. You returned to food slowly, one olive, a bite of barley cake, sips of watered wine. Each meal reminded you of him, each bite was shared with memory. And then something stranger. You began to ritualize your meals. A bowl of lentils placed on the empty seat beside you. A goblet poured, then untouched. You take one bite and leave the rest. Symbolism, mourning, guilt. Maybe all three. Your cooks learned not to ask questions. They started preparing quieter meals. No more fireworks of spice or absurd pastry sculptures. You wanted warmth, simplicity, the kind of food you once ate together when you were both young and full of fire. You remember one evening you sat alone beneath a hanging lamp, chewing flatbread with olive oil, and realised you hadn't spoken in hours. The silence clung to your ribs like a second hunger. From then on your meals were acts of memory. You even wrote down the dishes he liked. Lamb with fennel, pickled leeks, honeyed almonds crushed with dates. You had them prepared on certain nights, served in silence, eaten slowly, reverently. No more feasting. Not really. Even when others insisted on celebrating, you ate with restraint. When the musicians played, you barely heard them. When the wine was poured, you drank, but it didn't warm you. Hephaestion's death changed how you ate, maybe how you lived, because food for you had always been more than sustenance. It was strategy, it was camaraderie, it was ritual. And now it was grief. Historians still wonder why your health declined so quickly after his death. Some say you were poisoned by sorrow more than by any enemy. Others believe you simply lost your appetite for victory. Either way, the decline began not on the battlefield but at the table. Where once there was joy, there was now absence. Where once there were 2 cups raised in laughter, now there was only one raised alone. And that in the end may have been the most bitter taste of all. 10,000 guests. That's what they told you. 10,000 soldiers, officials, satraps and dignitaries gathered in Susa, seated in neat rows beneath the desert stars, staring at their identical platters, waiting for you to raise your goblet. It was the banquet of banquets, a logistical miracle, a political powder keg, a dinner so large it needed its own cavalry escort. And yes, somehow they served everyone. You sat in the centre, of course, high-backed chair, a table wide enough to seat a dozen, but reserved only for you. Around you, concentric rings of tables rippled outward like waves in a wine-dark sea. The feast was about unity, about folding the Persian and Macedonian worlds into one single digestible empire. But it also had a menu. You remember it vividly, because how could you forget? Start with the bread flat, thin, brushed with egg yolk and dusted with sesame. Then the olives, both green and black, soaked in citrus and spice. Then skewers of roasted lamb marinated in garlic wrapped in grape leaves. That was just the first course. Then the fish arrived, grilled whole, their bellies stuffed with herbs and oranges. Each one garnished identically, each one slightly overcooked, because when you're serving 10,000 people, the concept of medium rare becomes theoretical. The rice, though, the rice was perfect, fluffy yellowed with saffron, studded with roasted almonds and slivered pistachios. Historians would later call it one of the earliest records of an organised, standardised mass feeding of multiple ethnic groups. You just remember chewing slowly and hoping it wouldn't turn into a riot. Because here's the part the scribes left out. It was awkward. The Persians eyed the Macedonians with suspicion. The Macedonians looked at their Persian wives married just days before many against their will like confused tourists. No one laughed. No one drank too much. It was all too polite. Hephaestion would have hated it, or made fun of it until it felt normal. You tried. You raised your goblet, gave a toast about unity, about blending cultures, about how cumin and coriander were no less noble than oregano and thyme. That got a few laughs, mostly from your cooks. You toasted again, to the empire, to peace, to indigestion. That one actually landed. And then everyone ate. 10,000 mouths chewing in unison. The sound was eerie, like a locust swarm of diplomacy. You walked among them afterward, plate in hand, pretending to be casual, asking if the lamb was too dry, asking if the barley cakes were seasoned enough. Soldiers didn't know how to answer. Nobles bowed. One old satrap asked you if you'd ever had pickled mango. You said no. He handed you one. You chewed it for 15 full seconds before responding, "I'm awake now." Historians still debate the success of that meal. Some say it was brilliant statecraft, a symbol of unity and shared purpose. Others call it forced harmony and edible illusion, a banquet of compliance dressed in gold. You saw it as a test. Could an empire be built one bite at a time? Could you convince warriors and aristocrats to trust each other over lentils and lamb? Could you make peace feel like a full belly instead of a treaty? Maybe. You tried at least. And there were moments, tiny flickering ones, when it worked. When a Macedonian shared figs with a Persian. When soldiers traded spice packets. When someone started playing music and the rhythm cut through the tension like a hot knife through buttered millet. You sat back down, fingers sticky with honey, and let yourself imagine a future where people dined together instead of dying together. But of course reality crept back. The rice cooled, the meat hardened, the goblets emptied, the dancers tired. By midnight the tables were quiet and the moon cast shadows over half-eaten platters, and somewhere deep in the crowd a soldier muttered that he missed his mother's soup. You smiled, because you did too. Beneath all the glory and planning and golden trays you were still a boy from Pella trained on lentils and dreams. And this ridiculous dinner with 10,000 guests was still just a meal. Still just a moment. One you hoped they'd remember. Not for its size, not for its politics, but for the way it almost felt like home. The platter arrives with no name attached. Just steam and the smell of flattery. Tonight you're not eating for hunger. You're eating for influence. Because when you rule an empire stitched together from half the known world, food stops being just food. It becomes a language of persuasion power and very polite manipulation. Meals as diplomacy. You take a bite of lamb cooked so tender it falls apart under your gaze, seasoned with cumin, and something unfamiliar, maybe fenugreek, maybe charm. Your host watches closely, not too closely of course, just enough to catch the twitch of your eyebrow, the press of your lips. You nod. He exhales. He wants something. They always do. A new tax exemption, a seat on your council, maybe permission to marry his daughter off to someone conveniently influential. And this plate of lamb, it's part of the argument. This is how the game works now. Every dish tells a story. Every course says, "I am useful, I am loyal, please don't have me killed." You remember a dinner in Babylon where the first course was a thin soup of lentils and sour yogurt. Strange, but familiar. Then came the rice layered with chopped herbs, nuts and pomegranate seeds arranged in the shape of your battle standard. Subtle, obvious, effective. You approved his trade request the next day. Historians still wonder whether you manipulated these gestures or were yourself manipulated by them. Some say you were a master of symbolic dining, turning shared meals into shared intentions. Others argue you were often too tired to care, too distracted to notice the subtext beneath the saffron. They both have a point. You remember a banquet hosted by a wealthy merchant who served you a whole roast duck stuffed with grapes raisins and an ancient Persian poem etched into a slice of cucumber. It was absurd. You loved it. You gave him a shipping license. Then there was the satrap who offered you nothing but plain wheat bread, hard cheese, and cool water. Because simplicity honours greatness, he said. You respected that even more. Sometimes it wasn't even the food itself, but the effort. The man who learned to pickle olives in the Macedonian style just to remind you of home. The envoy who had ice carried down from a mountaintop to cool your wine. The cook who learned 3 of your favourite dishes just from hearing a stable boy describe them. That cook got a palace appointment, but it wasn't all admiration. You once attended a feast where every dish was so ostentatiously golden. Gold leaf, gold bowls, gold dust in the wine that you actually coughed. Not from the food, from the message. You stood, took a bite of barley bread from your own pouch and left. That satrap did not keep his position long, because you could admire extravagance, but you rewarded substance. Still the line was thin, blurred, you didn't always get it right. You once accepted a platter of grilled river fish from a regional governor. Tasty, perfectly cooked. 2 weeks later he led a rebellion. You called it the fish incident, and refused river fish for months afterward. Hephaestion teased you relentlessly. That's what's missing now, someone to deflate the pomp, to laugh at the edible metaphors, to ask if the stuffed peacock was supposed to be you or the empire. You miss having someone who ate beside you, not beneath you. Because that's what changed most of all. In the early days, food meant connection, brotherhood. You and your companions passing bread around a fire, laughing through mouthfuls of stew, spitting olive pits into the dark. Now meals happen at long tables, alone or among flatterers, surrounded by silence so thick you could spread it on bread. Sometimes you don't even remember what you ate. You finish your lamb. The cook presents a dessert honeyed figs with crushed rose petals. You nod again. The message is received, or sent, or both. Hard to say anymore. You sip your wine, spice chilled a little too sweet, and wonder how many decisions have you made because of food. How many alliances began with flatbread? How many betrayals were softened with pomegranate glaze? You don't regret it. This is how empires work. Through roads, through armies, through dinners where everyone pretends dessert is just dessert. But as the platter is cleared and another offer is made a favour, a trade route, a marriage, you suddenly crave something absurdly simple. An egg boiled, no salt. Just to remember what it's like to eat something that doesn't want anything from you. The fires burn low tonight in Babylon. You sit alone. Well, not quite alone. There are always attendants, scribes, guards, ghosts. But the meal is quiet, more ritual than nourishment. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. The bread is dense, dusted with ash. The herbs are bitter. There's a sharp metallic note in the wine. Everything tastes like grief. Hephaestion is gone and the city has not forgiven you for your mourning. Neither has your body. You ordered his funeral pyre built like a temple. Ordered temples torn down to honour him. You refused food for days, then devoured an entire roasted lamb in one sitting, as if appetite could swallow pain. It didn't. Now your meals are dark, not just in mood, but in flavour. Your cooks prepare blackened loaves made with barley and ash. You ask for vinegar-soaked herbs, for pickled onions, for pomegranates not yet ripe. The food bites, scratches, reminds you you're still alive. You used to eat for joy, for fuel, for curiosity. Now you eat for remembrance. You lift a bowl of lentil stew, Hephaestion's favourite. You spoon it slowly, the texture too familiar. You don't even like lentils, not really. But they taste like the past, like shared laughter over tasteless food, like a life you can't have back. There's no one at the table, just two bowls, yours and the one left untouched. You used to think grief would be loud, that it would scream in your ear. But instead it settled in your meals, quiet, methodical, unavoidable. Your attendants notice. One of them dares to ask if you'd prefer something lighter, fruit perhaps. Honey, you don't answer. He takes the hint. The next day the figs arrive, half rotten, the honey dark and bitter. Perfect. Historians still debate this period in your life. They write about your strange food choices, your silence at banquets, your preference for meals taken alone. Some argue you were slipping into madness. Others say you were reorienting your relationship with power, with death, with the divine. Some even suggest you believed eating bitter food would keep you closer to the underworld, that your taste buds were mourning along with your soul. No one really knows, and you wouldn't have explained it even if they'd asked. Because grief changes appetite. Where once you craved spice, now you seek sour. Where once you wanted roast quail and saffron rice, now you chew dry bread until your jaw aches. It's not punishment. It's just accurate. You remember a time when food excited you, when new spices thrilled you, when you tried that sweet fermented milk in India and grinned like a child. Now your grin feels distant, like something you misplaced and never looked for again. You've stopped asking for menus. Your cooks choose now. They seem to understand. They serve dark stews, simple rice, cold lentils, sour fruit. Food that fills the belly but leaves the heart hollow. You eat it all, silently. And yet there are moments, brief flickering moments, like the night someone brings you a slice of fig tart still warm, just barely spiced. You take a bite, close your eyes. It tastes like Misa, like Aristotle's garden, like simpler times. You almost finish it. Almost. Then you set it aside, because even sweetness now feels like a lie. There's a theory that your health declined not because of battle wounds or fever, but because you simply stopped wanting things, including food. That your hunger for conquest had no appetite left to accompany it. That even meals began to feel like performance. You can't deny it. Lately you eat like a man rehearsing death. Slowly, automatically, with the kind of calm that worries those around you. You've heard them whisper he doesn't eat enough. He eats too strangely. He chews like he's waiting for the end. They're not wrong. Still every night the second bowl is placed beside yours, untouched. Every night you eat your fill, not for the taste, not for the strength, but because grief must be carried in the body too. And there's no lighter way to carry it. You take another spoonful of stew, salted, heavy, familiar, And for a moment you remember not just his voice but his laughter, not just his face but the way he ate olives with his fingers and teased the cooks for oversalting everything. You smile, just a little, then chew, swallow, sit with it. Not fullness, not satisfaction, just memory. You sit where no man dares correct you. The sun is heavy in Babylon, slanting through the shutters, warming the table where your breakfast lies untouched. Bread, cheese, a bowl of something sweet made with milk and dates, and a plate of pork. Yes, pork, because when your Alexander rules are optional, you weren't supposed to eat it. Not here, not in Babylon, not in a city whose temples forbade it, whose priests consider the animal unclean, whose kitchens only prepare it behind closed doors and under whispered orders. But you asked for it anyway, and they brought it, because they always do. You tear a piece from the roast, eat it slowly, defiantly. Not because you love the taste, it's fatty, rich, unfamiliar, but because the mere act of chewing it reasserts your dominance. You're not just king, you're king everywhere, even on someone else's land, even at their table. Historians still argue how far you went in ignoring local food laws. Some say you were tactful, adapting in public, defying only in private. Others claim you became increasingly bold in your last year, using food as a form of subtle conquest, declaring with every bite, your gods do not own my hunger. They may both be right, because you did adjust. In Egypt you respected the priest's aversion to leeks and onions in sacred spaces. In India you refrained from eating beef even when it was offered in secrecy. You learned. You played the diplomat. Until you didn't. Until you started demanding dishes that no one wanted to serve. Pork in Babylon, quail cooked in wine during religious fasts, honey cakes during days of ritual abstinence. You called it honesty. Your scribes called it policy. But others saw it differently. Some of your own generals grew uncomfortable. They warned you, whispered that arrogance had a flavour and you were sampling too much of it. You ignored them, because to you, food wasn't about obedience. It was a test, a display, an assertion that your empire wasn't going to bend to the customs of the lands it ruled, but blend them, control them, absorb them, bones and all. You didn't just eat. You chose what you ate, and that choice meant everything. There's a memory you sometimes summon of a dinner with a local priest months ago. He served you only fruit and bread carefully chosen to be ritually pure. No wine, no meat. You smiled, thanked him, then asked for roasted duck. He hesitated. You waited. Then he served it. And after the meal you gave him a new title and doubled his temple's funding. Because respect, you'd say, doesn't mean submission. But there were limits. Even for you. You never demanded horse meat, even among tribes that ate it. You never desecrated food offerings, and you never made jokes about sacred meals. You played close to the line, yes, but never stomped over it. Not quite. Still the whispers grew louder. Some said the gods were watching, that each defiant bite brought you closer to their displeasure, that Babylon, beautiful and dangerous, had a long memory and a short temper. You didn't care. This morning's pork is a declaration, your declaration, that your empire, like your palate, has no boundaries. You eat methodically, wipe your fingers with a linen square, sip your wine, spiced, warm, familiar. The attendants hover in silence, unsure whether to clear the plate or leave it as some kind of omen. You nod once, they remove it, and in the stillness that follows you feel not guilt, not regret, but something colder, something like distance, from the world, from tradition, from your own men, some of whom have stopped eating with you entirely. They say your tastes have grown too foreign, too erratic, too imperial. You laugh. They eat what they're told, you eat what you want. Still a shadow passes over the table. You think briefly of a simpler meal, bread dipped in olive oil, a handful of olives, a cracked fig. You think of Hephaestion tossing grape seeds at your head, smirking over half a cheese wheel. You think of the time when food was just food and not a throne, but only briefly. Then you drink the last of your wine stand and leave the table. Another day awaits, another ruling, another march, another enemy too polite to admit they're afraid of you. And tonight you'll dine again, probably something forbidden. Just to remind everyone, especially the gods who rules this table, the scroll lies open beside your plate, ink still wet. Notes scribbled in haste. It's a list of meals compiled by your stewards, copied by scribes and annotated by historians who will argue over its accuracy for centuries. They're calling it a record of imperial taste. You call it dinner plans. You spear a cube of roasted lamb with your dagger. The scribes flinch. One clears his throat, trying not to smudge the parchment as he writes. You chew slowly, watching his quill. He writes roast meat seasoned with cumin and dried coriander. You swallow, it was thyme. He nods, corrects it. This is what it's come to chronicle chewing. A menu not just for the body, but for history. You never asked for a food record, but someone decided future kings might want to know what you ate. Whether you liked dried figs or fresh. Whether you preferred Greek olives or the larger, oilier Persian ones. Whether you took honey in your wine or only in the mornings. It feels absurd, but it's also tempting. Because if they're going to write about you better, they get it right. You dictate slowly between bites. Yes, you liked lentils, but only with vinegar. No, you didn't care much for pomegranates unless they were pressed into juice. And absolutely not raw garlic before battle. It made your soldiers avoid your tent. The scribe scribbles. The cheese plate arrives, goat mostly, soft, slightly sour. A touch of mould on the rind. You nod. They write matured goat cheese unadorned. You lean back smirking, make it sound noble, like I'm feasting on courage. He underlines it twice. Historians still argue whether these food records were fact or propaganda. Some say your scribes inflated your taste, adding exotic ingredients, implying you dined like a god, drank like a poet, and never touched a spoon. Others suggest it was all part of your image. You wanted to be remembered for eating the world one spice at a time. And there are stranger theories. One scroll claims you never ate the same dish twice. Another insists you carried your own spices in a jewelled box. A third says you fasted for days before battle and broke the fast with a single apricot and a bowl of milk warm to your body temperature. All nonsense, but you don't correct them. Because food now is myth. The roasted pheasant with gold leaf. That happened once. It was dry. The soup made with wine and melted snow, also real. You hated it. Called it damp ambition. But you liked some of it too. The boiled chickpeas with garlic and mint, the barley cakes soaked in honey, the yogurt drink that tasted like clouds and regret, the fish roasted with dates stuffed with pine nuts, the strange green pickle from India that made your lips burn for 2 days. You remember all of them. You remember the meals where no one spoke, where grief thickened the broth. You remember the banquets so loud the wine seemed to evaporate mid-pour. You remember the lonely suppers, the battlefield breakfast, the stolen fruit behind temple walls. And yes, you remember the bad meals. The spoiled eel, the goat stew that made half your command sick, the wine that might have been vinegar or just very ambitious vinegar, the cheese that bit back. It's all in the records now. The scribe looks up. Shall I include the bread, he asks. You glance down at the wedge of flatbread on your plate. Hard, uneventful. You nod. Describe it as unyielding but dependable, like Macedon. He grins. You finish your meal as another scribe arrives, this one holding scrolls filled with arguments. Which of your feasts was most symbolic? What dish best represented your legacy? Did you prefer to eat with Persians or Greeks? How much did your taste reflect your politics? You shrug. They ask if you want to be remembered as a conqueror or a philosopher. You answer by reaching for a date stuffed with almonds and honey, taking a slow, deliberate bite. Write this down, you say voice low. I ate what was offered. I remembered what mattered, and I never once let hunger decide for me. He writes it word for word. You chew the last of the date, watching the oil lamp flicker. The meal is over. The scrolls are full, and somewhere far in the future people will debate whether you really said that. Let them. You've left the world your words, now you leave them your table. You lift the cup slowly. It's heavy silver, studded with lapis, cool to the touch, even in the Babylonian heat. You've held it hundreds of times. Tonight might be the last. The wine inside is dark, fragrant, spiced with cinnamon, clove, maybe a hint of something sharper. You don't remember asking for it. But then again, lately, you don't remember asking for much of anything. Your stomach turns just a little. You drink anyway, because this is the Last Supper, though no one's called it that yet. Not out loud. The food laid before you is modest by your standards. Flatbread still warm. Dried fruit. A dish of soft cheese drizzled with honey. A small bowl of stewed lentils with bitter greens. The kind of meal you used to eat back in Mieza. Back when your only enemies were boredom and Aristotle. Now your enemies were crowns or smiles. You chew slowly. The bread is good, nutty dense. The cheese sharper than you expected. You dip a corner of the bread into the lentils, taste the bitterness, feel your jaw clench. It's fine. Everything is fine. But your body disagrees. There's a heat in your chest now. Not the wine. Not just the wine. A prickling beneath your skin. A fuzziness behind your eyes. You shake it off. You've had worse. After all, you once drank camel milk fermented in a war drum. You survived that. Probably. Your men are still eating. Some are laughing. You hear snippets of conversation, someone telling a story about the peacock feast in Susa. Someone else complaining that the olives here are too soft. Hephaestion would have had a field day mocking that. You sip again. Historians still debate what happened next. Some say you were poisoned. Others say it was fever, malaria, typhoid, something born from stagnant water and exhaustion. A few even insist it was divine punishment that your final drink offended the gods. The truth. Only your body knew, and it didn't say much. The wine hits harder this time. Your stomach churns. You press your hand to the table. Someone notices. Footsteps rush forward. The cup is taken gently from your fingers. You mutter something about the lentils. They laugh, nervously. But you know, deep down you know. This meal is different. You look at the bread again. Uneaten. A bite or two missing. The figs untouched. The honey starting to harden. It all feels unfinished. Like a letter with no signature. You try to stand, you don't. You lean back instead. The room tilts slightly. The lamps shimmer. The food before you blurs at the edges. Someone calls for a physician. Someone else clears the dishes like it matters. It doesn't. The last thing you taste is honey. Not ambition, not power, not the ash of burnt cities or the blood of the fallen. Just sweetness, slow and sticky, familiar. You think of home. You think of olive trees and barley fields. You think of the first meal you ever remember your mother handing you a bowl of warm milk and wheat. You hated it. You miss it. You close your eyes. The cup sits empty. The bread goes cold. And the world you carved with fire and steel suddenly feels very small. They still set the table. Long after you're gone, long after the empire crumbles and the generals divide your world like merchants haggling over olives, someone still places a bowl of lentils where you used to sit. A ritual, a memory, a quiet echo of a king who once tried to taste the whole world. In Alexandria, chefs whisper your name as they sprinkle saffron. In Pella, old men swear you used to eat barley cakes with your fingers and never complained when they were stale. In Babylon, children are told the story of the night you drank too deeply and vanished into myth. Food became your legend's shadow. Historians pore over menus written in fading ink, arguing over whether you truly preferred dates over figs, whether you created an imperial cuisine or simply ate whatever was in front of you with the focus of a conqueror and the hunger of a man who never stopped moving. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between a fig and a flame. You changed how people thought about meals. You made dinner political. You turned rations into unifying forces. You feasted with Persians and Egyptians, Indians and Macedonians, not just for diplomacy, but for understanding. You ate with kings and cooks, soldiers and strangers. And in doing so, you stitched your empire not just with roads and laws, but with recipes. Centuries from now, they'll still recreate your banquets. They'll serve roast lamb with coriander and pretend they're seated under a Babylonian sky. They'll mix wine with honey and mutter your name like it tastes of ambition. They'll argue whether your final cup held poison fever or the last drop of weariness that even you couldn't chew through. But they'll all agree on one thing. You ate boldly. You didn't just sample the world, you devoured it. Plate by plate, bite by bite. And yet in the end, the food that lingered longest wasn't the most expensive or the most exotic. It was a bowl of lentils shared with a friend, a hunk of bread beneath a cypress tree, a stolen fig in the shadow of a half-built city. That's what remains. Because even empires fall, but the taste of that fig that stays. Wind down final 300 words. So now as your breath evens out and your eyelids start to flutter, picture this. You're back under a quiet sky. No tents, no trumpets, no scribes scratching notes as you chew. Just the hum of cicadas and the rustle of wind through long grass. You sit on a flat stone. It's warm beneath you. In your hands a small wooden bowl, simple, smooth worn at the rim. Inside a few olives, a torn piece of barley bread and a smear of cheese beginning to melt in the sun. Nothing grand, nothing gilded, just food. Real food. Honest and enough. You tear the bread slowly, dip it, chew. The salt hits first, then the quiet, then the comfort. No empire to manage, no myths to fulfill. Just the slow, soft rhythm of chewing, of being. You look out at the hills. Somewhere beyond them the world is still arguing about you, still carving your face into coins, still tasting your shadow. But here in this dream they don't need to. Here you're not Alexander the Great. You're just a boy again, hungry, tired, content. And the only thing left to do is sleep. End of script, sweet dreams.